Hi, welcome back to the Hard Knocks Guitar Shop. My name's Will Kelly. I'm the monthly repair columnist for Vintage Guitar Magazine. And along with PrecisionGuitarKits.com, we're going to bring you this series of setup and instructional videos on how to optimize the playability and tone of your instrument. It's called the 7-step setup. Setup is a series of procedures, when performed in proper sequence, that maximize the action, intonation, playability, and electronic potential of any electric instrument. These 7 steps are very critical. You can't skip one or move around. You got to start with 1, move through 7, and at the end of it you're going to have a fantastic instrument. Most guitar techs know that a great instrument is 50% wood and 50% setup. The first video in the 7-part setup series concerns restringing your guitar. Now I know that sounds like a fairly simple thing to do. Go down to the local music store, buy a pack of strings, come back to the house, slap them on, and go back to annoying your neighbors again. But it's not quite that simple. I get asked a lot, how many winds should I put on my peg head tuners? Should I change one string or all 6 at one time? These questions and more, the answers to them really depend on the type of instrument, type of tuner, whether it's a locking system or not. There's a lot of factors. So the better you understand the process of properly changing a guitar string, the better off you're going to be. So let's get started. I personally don't believe that there's one brand or one manufacturer that makes a truly superior string to all others. It's just the string that better fits your playing style, your playing habits. So buy a quality set of strings. Stay away from the store brand or no-name strings because they tend to really not last very long. They sound dull. They have a rough feel to them. One thing you may not know is that all strings come from the manufacturer with a slight contamination due to the manufacturing processes. Whether it's a light coat of grease, oil, or some particles, whatever, they all have trash or dirt on them. That's the enemy of a guitar string tone. And that's stuff that we end up putting on it during playing time, so we certainly don't want it on there from the start. Okay. One thing that's pretty critical when you do get a new set of strings is to clean them properly first, believe it or not. And I'm going to prove it to you right now. I've got this brand new set of strings right here. And I'm going to pull out the low E string. Now this is some naphtha. It's basically just a highly purified lighter fluid, okay? In a white paper towel. Alright? I'm going to wet the paper towel just slightly. And then I'm going to run this brand new out of the package string through this paper towel. That was one pass, right? Okay? Look what we've got. See all that black, 2 black lines right there? That's crap that was on the strings. So the first thing I want you to do is thoroughly clean each string in the set after you pull it out of the pack. Use naphtha. It's an excellent degreaser, and it really doesn't leave any residue or anything like that on the string itself. Okay? So once you've thoroughly cleaned that string, you can see there's a lot of residue on this once white paper towel. This is stuff that we want to get off the string. Modern electric guitar strings have a small metal barrel ball with the wire wrapped around it to terminate the end. This is a common point of breakage because the wire is highly stressed as it's tightly wrapped to secure the ball so that the string doesn't slip. A great suggestion is to solder the ends where the wire wrap is twisted. This reinforces this already strained area. Make sure that the wire wrap is warm before you apply solder. Don't apply too much, and it should just flow lightly on and through the wire wraps themselves. You're not trying to put an ultra thick coat of solder on this. What you're trying to do is reinforce these wire twists so that they don't break quite as easily. That is a great way to extend the life of a set of strings, especially if you use the tremolo bar a lot or do some deep bends. So let me try to answer the first big question I usually get asked about string changes, and that is, how many winds do I put around the tuner shaft? And that is a question that has no definitive answer, you know, for everything. Every guitar is different. Now you've got three basic types of guitars we're going to talk about today. The first one is the Gibson style, for lack of a better word, arrangement. You've got a stop tail piece, you've got a Tuneomatic bridge or a stop tail bridge, and then you've got a shorter scale, 24 3/4, and then you've got a 3-on-3 peg head arrangement, 3 on either side. Okay. Another thing is that the headstock break angle on vintage Gibsons around 17 degrees, more modern Gibsons about 14 degrees. And what we mean by that is from a vertical plane coming off the fingerboard, the headstock tilts back. It does this so that it provides a certain break angle across the top of the nut, some downforce, so that the string can sustain and have a nice clear ring off tone. Okay. Then what we've got is the other side of the storm, and that is the Fender Stratocasters, Telecasters, Jazzmasters, Jaguars, etc. These are solid body guitars, but they traditionally, except for the Telecaster, have some sort of tremolo system on them. Really brilliant design for the Stratocaster. And then you've got a longer scale, 25.5, 25.5 inches from nut to bridge. Now, for Fender style guitars, traditionally they have 6 on a side, and what that is you see all the tuners are facing in the same direction upwards. Okay. Now, peg head angle. This is a big difference between the two styles of guitar. If you look at this guitar, the peg head angle is exactly what the fingerboard plane is. There's no break angle. It merely extends out. So Fenders are notorious for having very shallow or flat break angles over the nuts. That's why you see string trees, usually on the peg heads of Fenders, to pull those strings down so that you get a better or steeper break angle coming off the back of the nut. Now with these style guitars, you can get either locking nuts, like these. These are Spurzl style, center pin style, or you can go vintage style with Kluson or even modern Fender die-cast tuners. But regardless of that, you're still dealing with a break angle situation, and there's a great way to restring the guitar to maximize that break angle. Stratocaster bridges typically have two distinct styles. There's the vintage style, which has 6 separate mounting screws along the front edge, and these are a knife blade edge that rocks the entire unit forward. You've got 6 separate bent metal steel saddles on top of a die-cast base with a steel or die-cast or brass sustain block underneath. Then Fender decided to take care of a lot of the problems and get to a more modern style of Fender Stratocaster bridge. So what you see with the new improved Fender bridge is a modified 2-point mounting system. So you've only got 2 bolts to rock the entire unit forward with. Instead of bent steel saddles, you're starting to see a variety of compound materials being used for the saddles themselves, from stainless steel to even graphite. These have a wonderful warm sound and do not bind on the string. They really enable super stable tuning. So sometimes it doesn't matter if you're going to take all strings off at once or just one at a time. In this case, what I'd like to do is maybe clean the fretboard off, maybe polish out some small dings or scratches in the fret tops. So I think I'm going to take all 6 off at once. There are power winders, manual winders, etc. I like a manual winder. It just gives me a greater degree of control, and I can easily undo the string without stressing it or going too fast and maybe causing a problem by not catching a string end bent down and digging into the paint on the headstock, because you never know. So we're just going to go ahead and sequentially take all these off. I know some people recommend taking one outer, the outer strings off and moving inward. And that would be fine if you were using really thick strings with a heavy gauge and there was a lot of counter tension in the truss rod set on the neck. But when you're using thin strings, the wood's really not moving all that much because there's a lot less tension than the thick old-timey 14, 15, or 16 gauge E strings. So we're just going to take all 6 off in sequence for this particular instance. So we've got the old strings removed from the guitar. Take this opportunity to go ahead and wipe down the fingerboard real good. Maybe take some really fine 4/0 steel wool and polish the fret tops a little bit. Maybe moisturize the fingerboard with a little lemon oil or linseed oil. Proper way to do that is to spread the oil on the wood, let it soak for about 10 or 15 minutes, and then wipe it off again with a soft cloth. You don't want to leave it on there overnight. It'll soak in, start softening the wood up. What we want to do is retain moisture and prevent any additional water or sweat absorption from your fingerboard. That's a great way. You can't oil maple finished fingerboards, obviously. So we've got all of our strings and we've got the ends all soldered. So what we're going to do now is go ahead and load all 6 strings in to the through the back of the trem block if it's a vibrato or a Fender Stratocaster, or if it's a Gibson, you just merely want to feed them through the tailpiece on the guitar. But let's go ahead and put all 6 strings on. So we're going to take our low E string. First thing I like to do is align the holes in each of the peg head tuners so that they're all facing directly north-south along the plane of the string itself, as you can see by inserting this string through there. So I like to go ahead and pull this through. Now, with Fender Stratocasters, Fender non-angled, non-break peg heads, what you're trying to do is maximize the break coming off the nut. In other words, if you just put one wrap over this, basically the string plane is almost identical before and after the nut, which means there's really not a lot of down pressure there. What we really want to do is get this string so that after it comes off the nut, it leaves the tuner at the bottom rather than the top. Top, no break angle. Bottom, good break angle. So how do you do that? Well, I believe the trick is to put one wind, not double winds, but one solid wind all the way down so that the last wind leaving the shaft leaves right on top of this screw. How do you do that is by experimenting and trial and error. But the rule of thumb I use is this. I measure tuning post spaces. So for the first tuner, I need to cut the string at 2.5 tuner distances. So I'm going to cut this string about right here, and then when I wrap it on, it's a thicker string, so it's not going to take much. It'll get all the way to the bottom of this in one single solid wind. We don't want it doubling back up. That's where you get slipping started. Okay, so we're just going to go ahead and snip that right there. Alright, now place a little bit of the string through the shaft. You don't want a lot of excess and you don't want it buried in here. I like to leave about a 1/16 of an inch. I'm going to make this first bend manually. Then I'm going to pull the string back out and kind of bend this in a little bit more with my finger. And what that does is it gives me a good, nice, sharp edge for that tuner to bite in. So it's not going to slip from there. My first wind over will be on top of this little nub we left. And then I'm going to wrap it under where we entered the tuner shaft. And then I'm going to wrap it under this little nub. So I've got the first wind on top, the second wind on bottom, and they pinch that together. Okay? And then we're just going to go ahead and continue on pulling the winds up in a single layer. I'm going to use my manual tuner assist, and we're just going to keep winding it and pulling it, winding it and pulling it. Seat the string into the nut slot, pushing down here, And there we go. Now that's not all the way fully down on top of this, but you want to leave a little bit of air because you've still got to tune it up to pitch. And then we're going to repeat the same process again with these subsequent strings. And what we're going to do is, as the string gets smaller, the cut distance actually gets longer. For example, we measured out 2.5 tuner spaces here to make our cut. But for our A string, we're going to go 1, 2, 3, 4. So the 4th tuner slot away from our A string is where we're going to make our cut. Once again, we've oriented the tuner slots so that we're coming straight in this way. We're going to leave about a 1/16 of an inch nub, and then we're going to bend this over and then pull it back out, manually put a sharper break angle in that. Our first fold over is on top of the little nub. We pass under the entrance point and then back under the string again. Once you've got it seated very well, we're just going to slowly tighten it while maintaining that break angle so that the string seats evenly as it rides or coils down the shaft. Pull, tighten, pull, and tighten, and gradually you'll get all the way to close to the bottom. And as you notice, we've got a good break angle there, which is going to give us good sustain. All you got to do is keep repeating this, but the intervals are this: 2.5 tuner spaces in cut for your E, 4 for your A, 5.5 for your D, and then the rest of these leave uncut. They're long enough and thin enough away that one full wind won't be a double wrap on any of these as you move down. So these are what the lengths of wraps look like from the side for a typical Fender or non-break acorn peck head. You see we've got a good long single wrap of wire coming down the top of the tuner shaft, and that provides a pretty good break angle for the string and for the string trees, because once again, if there's no break angle over those, they're going to rattle and sound loose as well. So we've got a decent break angle over the nut for most strings. And we've got a few wraps around. No double wraps, if you'll notice. Everything is single wound. Now we're going to stretch these out. An important part of a proper string installation on an electric guitar is pre-stretching or seating the strings. And what I mean by that is this: you can just grab a string in the middle and start yanking on it, but that's a good way to break a string. What you really want to do is pinch the string as you move along its length to stretch it out. All I'm doing is just down at the ends and up in the middle with my thumbs and stretching the string out that way. Okay? What that does is it pre-stresses the string and gets the coil windings stretched out to their comfortable limit, and it doesn't stress out the bridge or the tuner situation, because that's where you're going to have problems with strings breaking while you're stretching them. Grab it in the middle and start yanking. All the stress is on these ends. So work your way through, tune it back up to a close enough pitch. You want to keep working on the strings while they're being stretched, keeping them in a constant pitch level. So after you've stretched it a few times, go back and stretch it again. And just work your way up and down the length of the string, and you'll notice every time you do this procedure, the amount of detuning will lessen. And at some point, after you stretch it for a while, it stays in tune. And there you go. You've stretched the string out properly. And work your way down each one of the individual 6 strings. Of course, take it more easy with the unwound strings. They don't require near as much stretching. You know, make sure that the windings are all seated at the top. There's no binding at the nut. I recommend using Dr. Ben's nut sauce, which is a great way to put a small dab at the bottom of each nut slot, and that makes the string move evenly and quickly and securely through the nut slot without binding or causing hang-ups in tuning. Once you've done that, the strings are stretched out. we've got the bridge properly adjusted, we've got the tuning heads secured, we've got a properly strung guitar. Now there are some differences with the Gibson style guitars. I want to talk to you about those next. For Gibson style guitars, you have a different bridge setup and stop tailpiece instead of a vibrato consolidated bridge unit. Most of the time you'll see that these pieces are loose and just fit directly on top of these adjusting screw inserts or stud inserts that are set into the bodies themselves. Okay, one thing you want to do when you get these off is to just take a clean cloth and wipe underneath, wipe off the pickup tops, wipe off your fingerboard, do a little bit of maintenance on here. Okay, but as with the Fender or vibrato style guitars, you also want to make sure that you get all 6 strings fed on at one time. It's a lot easier to do that while you're holding this than to try and feed them through from the end while it's down there. So we're just going to go ahead and take all 6 strings, feed them through here. Once again, we want to make sure all of our tuner shafts are aligned in a north-south direction. Now, you'll notice that these tuner shafts on a typical Gibson style guitar do not stick out quite as high off the face of the peg head as Fender's does. Therefore, you get less opportunity or less string winds available to you from the shaft inlet to the retaining screw that is on the top there. So my rule of thumb is this: with Gibson style or shorter shaft guitars, I usually cut 2 tuner spaces. Remember, on Fenders we were going 2.5 for the first position. So for this one I'm going to go 2 tuner positions and make my cut accordingly. Then pretty much the procedure is the same. I want to leave about a 1/16 of an inch sticking out as the tuner shaft, and then I'm going to take my first pass and bend it over a little bit. Withdraw the string, and then I'm going to make a more severe bend in it with my finger before reinserting it. Then my first wrap around is on top of the string that's sticking out, the little nub, and the second pass is underneath that. Okay, and then I'm going to place it into my nut slot with my finger, maintaining a sufficient tension on the string as it winds. I'm going to keep pulling, tightening, pulling, tightening. Now this should be directly on top of that nut that we have holding the tuner shaft in place. That maximizes the break angle coming over the nut and gives us one singular wind all the way down to the top. We're going to repeat that again here with the 2.5, 3.5 for the tuner spacings as you cut. Remember, the strings get thinner, therefore more winds are available. With these, same thing. I would go 3.5, 3.5, and 3.5. If you want to go 4, that's fine, but 4 tuner spaces is where you cut the string, and that'll give you enough winds to get a full wrap, single wrap, all the way down on top of each one of these tuners. There's an average of 4 to 5 winds around each of the tuner shafts. There's an adequate break angle on top of the nut right here, and we've got unobstructed clearance. Neither the screws nor the truss rod cover is reaching the string, so these are able to ring off perfectly and clear, and that's what we want. That's a really good string change for a Les Paul or 3x3 headstock design guitar. A fresh set of properly installed guitar strings can make all the difference in the world with a guitar's sound and playability. Artists know this because every gig you see an artist perform at, they've got a brand new fresh set of strings on there. There's 3 facets to a properly installed set that really make the difference. The first one is, make sure that you have enough winds on the peg head tuner shaft to ensure a proper break angle over your nut. You need that break angle of 20 to 30 degrees so that you get enough down force and sustain and tone out of that string transference. Second thing is, make sure you stretch the strings incredibly well. Make sure that all the wraps are seated tightly and that all the coil windings have loosened to the point where they're going to loosen no more. Make sure that all of your mechanical points within the string path are stable, that they're screwed in tight, that there's no rattling around. And the third thing is this: make sure you use a little lubricant at the nut slot and on the bridge to ensure low friction and no binding when the string moves during bending or tremolo operations. This has been video 1 of a 7-step setup series with PrecisionGuitarKits.com. Hope you guys hang around because there's a lot more cool tips and tricks for me to give to you. So buckle up because it's going to be a fun ride.